The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 8. Meetings and Meals. A Thursday in early April 1994. It was only the Easter holiday in her third year, and already Hermione was greatly looking forward to the summer break. She had tried to take on too much, she saw that now. The time turner, whilst useful for allowing her extra time for homework, classes, and occasionally a little extra sleep, had become an albatross around her neck. She felt she had aged nearly 2 years in the span of the last 7 months. There were light footsteps on the boys' staircase. The shadow of Harry's unkempt hair was thrown into relief on the stone wall behind him, his wand casting a low lumos. "Hermione, I thought that might be you. More revision?" "Always, Harry. What has you awake at this hour?" "Something happened earlier. I went down earlier to visit with Hagrid at his hut. Ron was in detention and couldn't go with me, so I was by myself, and it was dark." Hermione was exasperated. Had this wizard learned nothing from his previous encounters with the Dementors? "Harry, you know you're not supposed to be out by yourself after dark. The Dementors are patrolling just outside the gates, after what happened on the train and at the Quidditch match against Hufflepuff. The Dementors are staying away, at least for now, but I did have an odd encounter out in the grounds, and I'm still not sure what to make of it." Hermione looked at him with concern. "What happened? Who did you meet?" "Sirius Black." It was almost too fantastical to believe. Sirius Black, it seemed, was quite possibly innocent. He and Harry's parents had all been double-crossed by another friend of theirs, Peter Pettigrew. This news would have been bad enough, but then Harry dropped an even weirder bombshell. Pettigrew had escaped punishment after framing Sirius for his and their murders all those years ago, and had apparently been masquerading as Percy and Ron's pet rat for over 12 years. She and Harry could not tell Ron about any of this, that much was clear. The idea that the boy had doted on and cared for the rat was sad enough, but that he had been essentially sharing a bed with a fully grown man was cringe-worthy, at the very least, even if one were to ignore the criminality of it all. Despite the strangeness of the tale, the story had been corroborated by Professor Lupin, whom Hermione trusted implicitly. He had seen the two of them, Harry and Sirius, on the grounds that evening on a magical map that he had confiscated from Harry weeks before. Lupin had gone to confront Black, to take him into custody and turn him over to the authorities. Instead, Black had explained everything. How he had recognized Ron's rat as Pettigrew from an article in the Daily Prophet. How he had escaped as an animagus from Azkaban. How he was coming back to protect Harry and capture Peter. Lupin had summoned the Prophet article from Harry's dormitory, and the photograph from it, plus Harry's description of Scabbers, had confirmed it for Lupin. Sirius had given Harry a photo album that he'd carried with him for the past 12 years, since he'd been arrested. The photos showed a happier time in the lives of Sirius and of Harry and his parents. Hermione's heart broke for the boy as he showed her picture after picture of the happy young family and their friends. Without Peter to corroborate the story, there was no evidence that Black was innocent, but Hermione could tell that he was truly innocent in Harry's eyes. "He'll stay in London. His ancestral home is on Plot Ball, so he'll be safe, and I might be able to go and visit at Summers." "That's lovely, Harry. I'm so glad to hear it." Hermione knew that above all, Harry wished for a real family. It might be 13 years late, but his godfather was here now. Weeks later, Harry shared a letter that he'd received from Sirius. Using his animagus form, he was trying to suss out where Peter Pettigrew might have disappeared to. Harry and Professor Lupin spoke to Professor Dumbledore and explained the situation at length. Dumbledore had been in touch with Sirius, and according to Harry, they had discussed their concerns with him about Voldemort regaining a loyal servant in the form of Peter, who might seek him out. At the end of the school year, Remus Lupin was making plans to move in with Sirius, so that they could work together on the Peter problem. All of them thought the worst, fearing that Peter might have gone to find his old master and restore him to life. And find his old master Peter eventually would, though he wasn't looking for him. Peter only intended to make his way to the old Riddle House. In the last years of Voldemort's reign of terror, late in the 1970s, they had used the house as a hideout. To Peter's knowledge, Voldemort had gone to great lengths to keep the deed to the house put in his own name somehow, whether through Confundus charms or imperious curses on Muggles. By using a handful of harmless spells and transfigurations, Voldemort had rendered the house creepy in the eyes of the townspeople of Little Hangleton, so that for the most part they left it quite alone. Any overly brave or overly stupid teenagers who took the challenge of trying to break into it didn't try a second time. The old Muggle caretaker, oblivious as always to the house's inhabitants, continued to care for the gardens and the exterior, leaving the inside to crumble and rot, or so he thought. In actuality, Voldemort had created a sumptuous wizarding oasis inside. Lush velvet curtains hung at the windows, rich brocade-covered chaises stretched unused along walls. In truth, Voldemort had only cleaned and revitalized what was once his grandparents' possessions, but to his followers that visited there during the height of his power, he gave the impression that it was all acquired by him, by his own pure-blood riches. None of that particularly mattered to Pettigrew, however. All he knew was that somewhere in northern England, in a tiny village called Little Hangleton, a sprawling, dilapidated manor house awaited him. And in the downstairs study, inside a desk, locked in a wooden box with a simple runic combination lock, was a collection of spare wands. One of them was yew and phoenix feather. Peter did not want that one. He had removed that one himself from the little house in Godric's Hollow, mere minutes after Voldemort had gotten himself blasted apart by baby Harry Potter. Peter would forever associate that wand with creeping back down the stairs, holding it out in front of him as though it were a Muggle bomb, carefully avoiding the crying black-haired baby and the dead gazes of Lily Potter and his old friend James. No, that one could stay inside the box forever, as far as Peter was concerned. His own wand wasn't there. It had been lost in the detritus of the destroyed house in Godric's Hollow. But any of the other wands, any of them, would be heaven-sent right now. With a wand he could disapparate. He could enter a Muggle grocery in the dead of night and take whatever he'd like. He could imperious a restaurant owner into creating the most fanciful, succulent dishes imaginable. Peter was quite hungry. Girding his strength, he pushed weakly through his barrier of leaves and loam, bracing himself for the chill he expected above ground. He had to go to the surface to scavenge something more to eat. His storage was empty. There was nothing left. Last night, he'd eaten a bit of dirt in the hopes of dampening the gnawing sensation in his stomach. But when he emerged, rather than finding the bleak midwinter he had found many times before, he was confronted with a tuft of green grass, and above him a weak grey sunshine. It was spring. Time to get moving again. Early July, 1994. Summer in England that year brought plenty of exciting news to the wizarding community. First, England was to play host to the finals of the Quidditch World Cup, and though the national team had lost and was knocked out of contention in an earlier round, the final match was certain to be exciting. Ireland was a solid contender, and Bulgaria would bring young phenom Victor Crumb, a superstar in the sport at the young age of 18. Secondly, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry would host a Triwizard Tournament, something that had not been attempted in many years. The first bit of news Hermione learned from the Daily Prophet, which she had delivered to her house in Hampstead. The second bit of news they learned from Lucius Malfoy, who learned it as a member of the Board of Governors. In a show of good faith, the Malfoys had agreed to come to dinner at the Granger's house. They arrived by Floo promptly at 6. Even though Draco had a slightly better understanding of the television, he knew rationally now that the people were not trapped inside. It was only sort of a unique photograph of them. He still gave it a wide berth as he stepped out of the flue. "Lord and Lady Granger, thank you for your invitation, and for welcoming us into your home." Lucius bowed to them, rising up to cast a slightly critical eye around the place. Whilst he knew better to expect a manor home, this was not what he'd imagined of the home of a Muggle commander in the Dark Lord's army. Though the house was spacious, finely furnished, and well decorated, it appeared that the formal dining room was directly connected to the kitchens, rather than being separated by a floor, as it was in Malfoy Manor. As he looked about, Lucius began to wonder if it was the only dining room. "Merlin help us all," he thought. "Mr. and Miss Granger, I'm so pleased to see you again," Draco began, earning a stern look from Lucius. Hermione had explained to him during the school year that her parents were not, in fact, a lord and lady, at least not in the formal sense. But Lucius had impressed upon him to treat the Grangers with the utmost respect due to the man's position within the Dark Lord's army, and starting off the evening by not addressing them with their titles seemed rather rude. To make up for it, Draco bent in a small bow to appease his father. "Hello, Draco. We're glad you're here," said Linda. "I hope you all brought an appetite. We owe it to curry. Chicken vindaloo and mutton chestnut with naan bread." "Yes, the non-elves really outdid themselves," Lucius said, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. "I can guarantee there will be none left when we're done with it." Draco smiled weakly because he could see that Hermione found this amusing, but he had to admit it was hard to figure out when Richard Granger was joking around. He was fairly certain, for instance, that the non-elves could just make more non-bread once theirs was eaten. As they sat around the table, Draco brought up the World Cup and shared the news that his father had acquired tickets for all of them to attend. "Oh, how exciting! I've seen pictures in Hermione's newspaper. It would be wonderful to see a match being played," Linda exclaimed. "Yes, we thought your family would enjoy it," Lucius replied, eager to please. "I'm particularly excited to see this Crumb kid play," Richard said conversationally. "Oh?" Lucius asked, intrigued. "Yes, he seems to be quite the rising star in the sport." "Yes, he's had good mentors over the years." If Lucius's suspicions were correct, Granger knew one of these mentors. Igor Karkaroff was another of those who had claimed to see the error of his ways, and had spoken out against his fellow Death Eaters after Voldemort's fall. Lucius assumed that Granger knew of all this, and that was why he was eager to see Crumb, thinking it would get him closer to Karkaroff for retribution. "Yes, well, I hear the Irish team has all new firebolt brooms as well," Richard offered. Draco shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Firebolt's superiority had been a point of contention within their house after Draco had failed to catch the snitch in the Gryffindor versus Slytherin game at Hogwarts in the past year. Draco was quick to blame the speed of the Firebolt, but Lucius was annoyed. The previous year, he had spent quite a few galleons to purchase new Nimbus 2001s for the Slytherin team, only for the season to be cancelled before it was finished. He'd expected Draco and the others to flatten the competition in his third year, but that hadn't been the case. "You're really learning a lot about Quidditch and broom types, Richard," Narcissa said. "Yes, I've been brushing up on my knowledge." Linda only rolled her eyes at her lap. Narcissa coughed into her napkin. Draco's and Hermione's eyes met as they challenged each other not to smile. It was nearly time for the Quidditch World Cup. They were to make a long visit of it. The Grangers would come on Sunday for dinner, and would spend the night at Malfoy Manor. They would leave after an early breakfast on Monday for the Quidditch World Cup. The game would be held that evening, and they would stay the night in the Malfoy tent, returning to Hampstead Tuesday morning. Draco and Narcissa were excited for their friends to visit. Lucius was nervous, having Richard Granger around, as always. The Grangers arrived at 5 in the evening, a bit early because Narcissa wanted to show Linda around the gardens. "Come on," Draco said, taking Hermione by the hand and leading her out the side door towards the lake. "I want you to see our Kelpie." Hermione immediately stopped walking, withdrawing her hand from Draco's. "Why would I want to see a shape-shifting demon creature that drags people underwater to kill them?" she asked incredulously. "Granger, I'm not going to feed you to it. I only want you to see it. Besides, he's quite tame. His name's Kirby. Most of the time, the shape he takes on is that of a small dog." At her look of uncertainty, he stepped back to her, placing his hands upon hers reassuringly. "I've been swimming in that lake since I was 6. I'm sure he won't hurt us." "Richard is excited for the match tomorrow. We've honestly never seen a flying broomstick, so it'll be a bit overwhelming, but thrilling, I'm sure. Richard always likes to act like he's seen everything before. I think he feels as though Lucius will judge him for being a Muggle if he doesn't. But truly, he's like a child at Christmas." Narcissa smiled. She was well aware of her own husband's desire to impress Richard, and she wasn't sure anything she said could dissuade Lucius from believing what he wanted to believe. But she also knew that it was likely at some point Lucius would outright make a comment about Richard's supposed history as a Death Eater, secret agent. When this happened, Richard would quickly disabuse him of this notion, and all of this, Narcissa and Linda's friendship, Draco and Hermione's young romance, would be over. Narcissa decided to take a gamble, share some of the truth, but perhaps not the whole truth. "Lucius is excited as well. He enjoys Richard's company very much. Tell me a bit about when you were younger, when the two of you met, Richard's time in the service, and all of that." "Oh, nothing very exciting, I'm afraid. We met at university, but he wasn't sure what he wanted to do, so he left and spent a few years as a young troop. He became a medic and really enjoyed it. He got out and finished his degree whilst I was in dental school. Then Richard got called back into the service for a few years, but it was stressful. Plenty of medical emergencies, I suppose. I was a few hours away, interning at a dental practice at the time. We weren't married yet. But I think the stress finally got to him, so he got out of the service again and went to dentistry school. We got married and opened our own practice, and that was that." "Is a medic considered a healer of sorts?" Narcissa asked. "Yes, I suppose that's the closest thing in the magical world." The blonde witch chuckled to herself. "I think Lucius assumes that he was some sort of special secret agent whilst in the service," she said, smiling as though this were a ridiculous notion. "Oh, my goodness! Well, that certainly wasn't the case." Linda laughed. Narcissa stopped and turned to her new friend, smiling gently. "The thing of it is, Lucius always wanted to be in the service himself. I think he's living a bit vicariously through your husband. He would be so disappointed knowing the truth, I think." Linda nodded. "I understand. Everyone likes to live out a fantasy sometimes, I suppose. Well, Lucius won't hear the truth from me," she smiled. "Good! It will be such a fun weekend, the 6 of us. Draco is quite excited about tomorrow as well. Not just for the World Cup, but that Hermione is attending with us. He talks quite a lot about her." "Yes, she's the same about him. I'm so glad they're friends." The two women smiled conspiratorially at each other and continued their tour of the garden. "Fancy a drink before dinner?" Lucius asked cordially, gesturing to his study. It was time for some answers. Once in the study, Lucius passed over the fire whiskey. Richard's glass after the reception years ago had gone nearly untouched, he remembered. He poured 2 glasses of ginger gin over ice, surreptitiously tipping a clear vial over the right one, whilst Richard was distracted by the books in Lucius's bookcase. "Ah, I see you have that new book on Transfigurations by Turnbull. Hermione is reading that one as well," Richard remarked. "Yes, it's fascinating," Lucius said, offering him the drink in his right hand. "Here we are, to strong friendships." Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great 78.